Hello and welcome to the 2024 NFL season. My name is Adam Levitan. We are gathered here this morning to talk about a DFS slate, not a UFL slate, not a preseason slate, but yes, an actual regular season NFL showdown slate between the Ravens and the Chiefs. To break down all angles of this game/slate, I am joined by two of the sickest showdown grinders I know, Cody Main of niche sports fame, of course, and DFS grinder Sam Brott from our sim and data side team. Cody, it's like Christmas. Good morning.
It is like Christmas. The warm-up slates are over. Preseason is behind us. We can almost officially put our pencils down for best ball season. DFS is back, baby.
DFS is back. Yes, my pencil is officially down for best ball for this season. Now we sit back and pray. Sam, how's it going today, buddy?
It's going great. I'd say it might even be better than Christmas. One of
Really
the
is.
best days of the year.
Really is. All right. And by the way, another showdown game tomorrow, which we'll be covering on the site between the Packers and the Eagles from Brazil. Anyways, tonight, Chiefs -3, total 47.5. Before we get into that, reminder with NFL season kicking off, if you want access to all our projections for every player in every game, all of our showdown work, all our ownership projections, Silva's matchups column, and more, you need our in-season package. Comes out to just $12.50 per week. You can find all the details up here, $12.50 per week if you get the annual pass. Also, want to be clear that we're going to show a lot of stuff on this opening show that we normally wouldn't. But we're doing this so you can get a look at the premium tools that we have at the Solver. We'll run some things through Solver simulations. In the future, a lot of these showdown shows will be part of the in-season package. Some of these shows will be free, but we won't show the tools. Again, if you do sign up for Solver, promo code ETR5 for 5% off, gives you access to Optimizer and or Sims. Those are separate subscriptions and an add-on to your ETR in-season sub. Again, please use the link that's up here if you do sign up for Solver so that all your ETR information syncs, assuming you are a subscriber. All right, Cody, as I mentioned, Chiefs -3, 47.5 for this game in Arrowhead. From an injury perspective, no Marquise Brown in this game. We'll get to the wide receivers there in a second. We are expecting Samaje Perine to play in this game for the Chiefs, despite joining the team just 6 days ago. Otherwise, I think relatively clean on injuries. Cody, any macro thoughts on this game, which has, not the highest total we've ever seen, but a relatively high total?
Yeah, one quick point on injuries, and though it's not really going to affect things leading up to lock, I don't think our projections are going to change much unless we get a surprise inactive. But salaries came out really early for this slate, it being the first slate, of course, and I think those salaries were set assuming Hollywood Brown would be in, and that's going to have a snowball effect on the price tags that we're going to see for KC wide receiver. So first macro point is this slate is very loosely priced, and for anyone that's tuned into these shows in the past, you know that saving salary or leaving salary on the table can be a big way to reduce your dupes and avoid running into a bunch of lineups that are going to be heavily duplicated. I think you can even drop that traditional number down even further, given some of the price tags that we have on the slate, as Adam has pulled up there. Rashee Rice, really cheap. Xavier Worthy, really cheap. So we'll talk about that more in a second. That was kind of my first macro takeaway when pulling up this slate is, my God, these guys are way too cheap, and ownership's going to come in droves on these guys. Secondarily, it seems like we have KC and or Baltimore on a showdown slate almost every other week. So having that type of historical data to look back on, what does the field do? What's winning in these lineups is what's winning on these showdown slates is super beneficial for us to have. I think it kind of just feels like a little bit more of the same. We've got Todd Monken as offensive coordinator for the Ravens. I think he's going to be dropping back at a pretty decent clip here with a fully healthy Mark Andrews, with Zay Flowers there, with Rashad Bateman taking a little bit of a leap. Looking back at the AFC Conference Championship game last year, that was their second highest pass rate over expectation game of the season. And so 46.5 point total, pretty attractive, close 3-point spread. I'm kind of expecting some offensive fireworks here. And I think that's going to be how I'm building through most of my lineups, is kind of expecting this one to be back and forth, with both offenses getting things going on, starting with the Ravens side, but certainly with the investments that the Chiefs made in the offseason, adding Xavier Worthy, I think we're going to see some offensive fireworks.
Yeah, I think the way that the AFC Championship game went last year is interesting because the Ravens got a ton of criticism for just like abandoning what got them there for a lot of the year. I should note that no L'Jarius Sneed for the Chiefs, obviously no longer with the team, I think makes a big difference for their defense. Sam, I'm curious what you think about these narratives that go on in people's head. I think the way a lot of people play Showdown is, oh, I think the Ravens are going to win and it's going to be high scoring. Let me build all my lineups accordingly. Or I think the Chiefs are going to win by a lot, way more than the line suggests, but it's going to be very high scoring or something like that. When you set up for a Showdown slate, Sam, how do you think about, is it worth going through those narratives, I guess, in your head?
Yeah, I definitely think you do need to go through the narratives. I think, it's kind of become common thought in the industry, like you need to tell a story with your lineup. And I think that's absolutely the case. I think though, at the same time, we need to be careful about not trying to tell too perfect of a story. Things are going to go wacky in NFL games, and we know that, and we need to kind of embrace that volatility in our lineups at the same time. And I think, the field is going to tell themselves very similar stories. It's pretty easy to get on certain narratives and kind of end up in the same place as everybody else. So I think while you want to tell yourself a narrative, you want to say, okay, well, what goes wrong with that narrative, and kind of have like a side plot to your little story there.
Exactly. And that's where this stuff comes in. And we've talked so much. And I love this table that we have in all of our Showdown breakdown articles. It is what we are projecting the field to do from a roster construction standpoint. In other words, we are expecting 1 Chiefs player and 5 Baltimore players on 2.6% of all lineups in the flagship on DraftKings tonight. So if you want to be contrarian right away, you can look at some of this stuff. Cody, any comments on the roster construction table here for tonight?
Yeah, especially if you're playing in this large $15 buy-in milli maker where there's like 200,000 entries or whatever, you have to think about which levers you need to pull in order to not run into some of these lineups that are going to be duplicated 200, 300, 400 times. And one of the ways you can quickly do that is just this roster construction utilization table. You can see that very few lineups are going to feature that 5-1 or 1-5 Baltimore heavy onslaught type build. It's tough to get there from a dollar perspective. The Baltimore pieces are a little bit more appropriately priced. And the fact that they're 3-point dogs and the fact that KC has the ability to drop back more often and spread the ball out more is just going to lend itself to naturally more KC heavy lineups. I actually think that this 4-2 stuff, the 4 KC, 2 Baltimore could really get outsized. I would be curious to hear Sam's thoughts there, but I think this could be upwards of like 40% of lineups going 4 KC, 2 Baltimore just based off of how things are priced out. But that's going to be one of the most common roster constructions of the evening.
Yeah. I think the reason that it's going to be so common is because, like Cody said, there are some gross mispricings on this slate. Patrick Mahomes is too cheap. Xavier Worthy is too cheap. Rashee Rice is too cheap. So even if I wanted to make a lineup with 4 Ravens and 2 Chiefs, like Cody mentioned, that's going to be way harder to fit than 4 Chiefs and 2 Ravens. Sam, any thoughts on the roster construction table here before we move on?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think just because of these mispricings, it's too easy to fit in guys like Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, Mark Andrews. And just given the fact that of the most mispriced guys, 2 of them are Chiefs, it naturally leads you to go Chiefs heavy.
Yeah. Is there anybody else you want to mention, Cody, that's grossly mispriced before we get into all the players here? The ones that stuck out to me were Mahomes, Rashee, Worthy, and I guess you could say Andrews too.
I think Andrews was the other one. The value is even, the traditional value in the sense of like the skill guys that are sub 4K, those guys even feel pushed up a little bit more. So we'll talk about them, how they feel a little bit more expensive, at least relatively speaking, based off how this slate is priced. And I know people will open up the slate and point to Worthy and Rashee Rice, but my goodness, this tag on Mahomes at 10-4 is wild. And there's another one on tomorrow's slate. I hope this isn't how DraftKings prices the quarterback position. I suspect they're cheaper just as a result of make it easier to make lineups, make people feel more comfortable about their lineups and stuff, and it'll get a little bit tighter as the year goes on. But if we're going to see Patrick Mahomes at 10-4, it might end up being a long year.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for cash, and I don't play much Showdown cash. However, if you do play Showdown cash, there's going to be some very clear lineups tonight featuring, 4 guys. If you think you can find people that are not going to play some of these really mispriced guys, I think that's an edge. Let's talk about the quarterback position here tonight. We do have a better projection on Patrick Mahomes than we do Lamar Jackson. Part of that is due to the outrageously high pass rate that we have for the Chiefs. Of course, led the NFL in PROE last year, pass rate over expectation, despite having like no one to throw to. This year, at least, they have Rashee Rice full time. They have Xavier Worthy in the mix. Won't have Hollywood Brown tonight. And the other thing from this on the Lamar projection is we have to give more rushing touchdowns and rushing attempts to Derrick Henry. And so that starts to chip away a little bit from Lamar rushing expectation from the touchdown side. Cody, how do you think about handling quarterback tonight? Should lineups have both quarterbacks? What kind of lineups? And what do you think about Mahomes and Lamar?
Yeah, I think certainly in cash game contests, both of these guys need to be in. They should be rostered in 100% of double ups. They won't be, so take advantage of that. Both of these guys are very much cornerstones and starting points in cash game roster construction. I think the more interesting discussion becomes, A, what do we do with them collectively in tournaments? And then B, more importantly, what do we do with them at captain in tournaments? And I'm really struggling. I'm kind of paralyzed at this point of where should we set Lamar Jackson's captain ownership? Because I think it's going to be lower than it has been on average. He's the most expensive player on the slate. We've already talked about the mispricings on Mahomes and Worthy and Rashee Rice. Those guys are certainly going to come up a little bit, I think. But if you look at Lamar Jackson historically, and a lot of this has to do with the dual threat upside, these guys are kind of like unicorns on showdown slates where you can play him a captain and kind of do whatever else you want with the rest of your lineup. His average captain ownership is 27.7%. We're clearly well below that. But I guess I'm wondering, could this even come in lower and make Lamar an even better captain play in tournaments? I think there's a possibility that it does. And if I start to get the sense that does, just based off of market sentiment and what I think the field's going to be doing as we get closer to lock, I think he becomes a really interesting tournament play at captain specifically. Obviously, you've got the dual threat stuff, but pairing him with the wide receiver, not named Mark Andrews, is going to end up being pretty unique, I think, as well, given the price tags on those guys. So I do have some tournament interest there in Lamar at captain. And I'm kind of having the same struggle with Mahomes. I think the Mahomes lineups are easier to make, and as a result could end up being more duplicated just because you run into Captain Mahomes and then you pretty easily fit in Worthy and then Rice, and then maybe you mix in Travis Kelce, who's a little bit more expensive. But I think those lineups end up being a little bit more duplicated. So if you want to go that Captain Mahomes route, I would be thinking about how can I include guys like, we'll talk about them in a second, but guys like Justin Watson, McCole Hardman, Sky Moore, Juju Smith-Schuster, can I even mix these guys into large field tournament lineups as a way to not run into what will be heavily duplicated Captain Mahomes plus, Rashee Rice or Xavier Worthy type stuff?
Yeah, well, I think that the narrative going on in your head is going to play out. In other words, you saw during drafting season, people started to feel a lot better about Patrick Mahomes than they did Lamar Jackson. I saw Patrick Mahomes start going in the 30s, in the late 30s, mid 30s actually, in best ball at times, whereas Lamar was lasting towards the mid 40s at times. And then on top of that, Mahomes is 1,000 cheaper. And on top of that, Mahomes' weapons are more mispriced. So I definitely think that we're going to see relatively depressed ownership on, especially at the captain spot, on Lamar. Sam, any thoughts on how you plan to handle the quarterback position tonight?
Yeah, I think Mahomes is definitely one of the few quarterbacks in the league that I really, really like to play captain. I think, there's kind of this tier of rushing quarterbacks like Lamar that are just obvious good captain plays because they can get there just on their rushing and they don't need to throw the ball a ton. And then on the other side, there's a lot of pocket quarterbacks where, if they do have a massive game, it's largely funneled through some kind of star wide receiver or tight end. And then that receiver is likely to be the optimal captain if that quarterback hits a ceiling. But I think Mahomes is one of the rare quarterbacks in the league where he can hit a 30-point plus ceiling. And because he has kind of a sneaky rushing ability, he spreads the ball around a ton. He could easily hit that ceiling with no receiver of his going over, say, like 15 points. Maybe, McCole Hardman catches a pop screen touchdown from Mahomes. He runs in one himself, and then maybe Kelce gets to 15 points and Rice gets to 15 points, something like that. And I think for that reason, Mahomes was usually a little underutilized in captain.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Cody, when you play someone like Mahomes at captain, do you force two pass catchers I know we don't want to make too hard and fast rules here for Showdown because being different and being wild often gets you to the top, but any loose rules for people playing either Mahomes at captain or Lamar at captain?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a big leverage point if you do want to go the Lamar Jackson route, and we'll look at our sims at the end of the show to see how some of these things rate out. But I think going the Lamar Jackson plus 2 pass catchers and forcing yourself to get uncomfortable with somebody like Isaiah Likely or Nelson Aguilar or Rashad Bateman is going to end up being lower owned, and I think it's probably better. Look, Lamar's 11-4. He can still get there, certainly with his legs. He can get there by supporting just one pass catcher. But I think in most instances, if Lamar's the optimal captain, he's probably carrying 2 pass catchers along with him. So I do like the double on Lamar, and I think most of the field is probably going to stop at 1. You know, something like 40 to 50% of lineups will have just 1 pass catcher in Captain Lamar teams. For Mahomes specifically, there's kind of a wider band on like where I think you should land with him, and that's kind of proven out historically, and for a lot of the same reasons Sam just pointed out. So you could have 3 guys get 15 DraftKings points, or you could have no one even come close because it's so evenly distributed, or because Mahomes rushes one in himself. So I think if you're building out a set of lineups, 20, 150, whatever, I think you want to have exposure to kind of a wide range there. I would have some Mahomes with 1, certainly a lot of Mahomes with 2, but I would even leave myself open to some Mahomes with 3, given the price tags on these guys, certainly. I think most of my Mahomes lineups, if I was only building 1, would probably be Captain Mahomes with exactly 2 Chiefs pass catchers.
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely possible, and we've seen this in the past, where Mahomes is the optimal captain, and none of his pass catchers even get dragged along. If he throws 1 touchdown to Justin Watson, that's his only catch of the game. There's another touchdown to Hardman, that's his only catch of the game. Those guys don't exceed like 12 points.
Yeah.
Mahomes can just get there all on his own.
Right. And that's a unique setup. Whereas like if this was a slate where it was, I don't know, Tua Tagovailoa or on the slate or something like that, when Tua goes off, you better believe that either Tyreek or Waddle is going to be the optimal captain, right? It's like way more likely one of those guys, the optimal captain. It's more concentrated. There's not as much rushing equity with Mahomes. It's different. The last thing I'd say on Lamar, rumors were out there, not rumors. He said himself, he lost like 20 pounds or something insane. He said he was down to 205 after playing closer to 220 in an effort to feel lighter and faster. We haven't seen him really yet at that weight, but I'm interested, and maybe he'll be even faster. So we'll see. Okay. Running back position is interesting, namely because we'll start on the KC side because we get Samaje Perine here. He has only been with the team for 6 days. However, fully expecting him to be active tonight in the pass catching role. And, you know, a lot of the stuff I saw out there was he doesn't need to know that much. He's going to get out there on some pass plays. Mahomes is going to tell him who to pick up on the blitz, and he'll do that, right? We are not expecting that many touches necessarily for Samaje Perine. As you see there, we only have 3.9 points for Perine, 15.5 for Pacheco. I still think Pacheco is going to play on a decent amount of pass downs. I still think Pacheco will be getting targeted in the screen game at least 1 or 2 times tonight. And then you get the Carson Steele price at 200. If you followed preseason at all, according to Twitter, Carson Steele is the best running back in the history of the NFL. So, Cody, what do you think about Chiefs running back tonight?
It's an interesting room because if not for the Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy price tags that we keep bringing up, Isaiah Pacheco feels pretty cheap at 8,400 on this slate in particular. And I think just based off of offseason sentiment, I think most people out there, best ball drafters, season-long drafters, pretty excited to play this guy, especially now with just Samaje Perine back there. Look, I'm glad people are excited about Carson Steele, who is listed as a fullback in some places and runs like a 4.9 40 or whatever, but I don't think he's going to figure in for much work this evening. I think it's going to be Isaiah Pacheco's show. And another ownership point where I'm kind of struggling is like, does Pacheco come down because the rest of these Chiefs wide receivers continue to need to come up? And if that's the case, that makes him a pretty interesting play. Obviously being at home, being a 3-point favorite, kind of being now in line for that bell cow role. Sure, he's going to lose a little bit of pass down work to Perine, but I think this is a pretty awesome spot for Pacheco. And if you start to get the sense that his ownership is going to come down because this pass catching core is going to come up, I think he makes even more sense. But right where it is right now, I think he's still a pretty phenomenal play. Yeah,
I mean, I don't believe Pacheco is really in any of our top 10 optimals. I'll pull them up here in a second. So Opto Bros are not going to be getting Pacheco at all. I think it's an interesting contrarian way to play it, especially if you think, listen, Perine's only been here for 6 days. How much can this guy really play? You know, and so under that narrative, Pacheco could be even better, again, we are not projecting Pacheco for a ton of work. I could see more people playing Steele here than we have it. Like, people just like this guy, you know, like they want to click him, and he's only 200, could allow you to do a bunch of different things. Sam, any thoughts on Chiefs running back here tonight?
Yeah, I don't think Pacheco will go completely overlooked, but I do think, he's definitely a good value on the slate. I think this is a good opportunity to kind of just embrace the unknowns of week one. Obviously we think we know what's going to happen and we're doing our best to project that, but I don't think anybody would be shocked if either P. Ryan played every third down in the game, or if Carson Steele played quite a bit, just with the idea, the Chiefs know this is a big game, but they also know it's week one and they want to keep Pacheco healthy for the rest of the season. They may not feel comfortable letting him play 90% of snaps tonight. So, I don't think it would shock anybody if Steele had, let's say, 2 goal line touchdowns or something like that. And at just a punt price tag, he lets you get onto some different builds that are going to be pretty chalky just by being able to use his salary as a relief to avoid some of those ultra chalk mispriced guys we talked about earlier.
All right, I pulled up the optimizer at the solver here. This is not the sim tool. This is the optimizer tool. If you're an ETR sub and you add on the solver through the subscribe tab on ETR, you can get to this screen here, which comes with our projections already uploaded here. And you see, you can run our top 20 optimals here, and you just are not going to get a ton of Pacheco. Looks like 35% here. Pacheco and no captain Pacheco. So again, I do not think Opto Bros are going to be getting Pacheco at a very high rate here. As I said, some of these teams, when you optimize, like teams like this with like Rashid captain, has Worthy, has both quarterbacks, going to be insanely popular and insanely duped, especially tonight where a lot of people aren't thinking about dupes. And again, I know we keep talking about dupes on here. When you're playing Showdown, believe me, I would do inhumane things to chop $1 million with someone, right? I would do absolutely inhumane things to chop $1 million with someone, I don't know, 10 ways or 20 ways. That'd be incredible, right? However, from an expectation perspective, when you go into a slate, it's so hard to get to the top anyways that you want to be unduped, because it just wrecks your expectation if your team is duped a lot. So yeah, obviously we'd love to chop, right? Like we'd love to chop it a certain amount of ways, but from an EV perspective and from the way you need to be playing this game perspective, avoiding dupes is way, way important. And yes, we are calculating dupes. We had a question from Jeff O'Connor. Does the ROI on solver sims take into account dupes? I'm assuming they do. Yes, they do. We'll get to more on the sim stuff here after we get through the players. Let's get back to Ravens running back, where yes, the big dog is in the house. Just seems like an awesome fit, right? Like, just seems like this is the kind of fit that the Ravens needed. They have gone for so long with so many dusty running backs who can't make big plays, who aren't that talented. Now they come in with Derrick Henry. And honestly, I know he's old. I thought Derrick Henry had a really good year last year. Titans offensive line was bad. His yards before contact was awful because the Titans offensive line was so bad. But man, I thought he still played well. And now he goes to a team where the run scheme is so good. They're obviously accounting for Lamar. Offensive line is worse this year, but still pretty optimistic on Derrick Henry. Now, I will say that Chiefs defense was good. And a lot of teams tried to run on the Chiefs because they had Snead out there and they were so good against the pass, but they were decent against the run as well. It's tough to get a big projection on DraftKings on Derrick Henry because we can't give him very many catches at all. But if Derrick Henry gets there, it's going to be touchdowns, multiple. Cody, what do you think about Ravens running back here tonight?
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the big dog. And I think if you're expecting this game to play close to the 3-point spread or for the Ravens to come out victorious, that's one of those type of stories you can talk yourself into with your lineup, that if that's the case, the pass rate is probably lower. The efficiency on the ground is probably improved. There's a good chance that the big dog found his way into the end zone. And in those circumstances, the 9K price tag doesn't feel so bad. I do think that this is probably one of the skill position players. I know people are pretty excited about Derrick Henry in this offense, and that's pretty clear to see from just the offseason, the rhetoric and sentiment around him. I think he's one of the one skill position players that if I had to say which guy has to get squeezed in order for some of these other guys to come up in terms of their ownership, Derrick Henry feels like the first guy, a road underdog against a pretty good Chiefs defense.
Yep.
I think we could end up seeing this number both at total ownership and captain ownership come in lower. So in these lineups where I am expecting this game to play close, like Vegas suggests, or for the Ravens to come out victorious outright, I think the big dog at 9K makes a pretty good case for a starting point.
I mean, the thing is, Sam, like, I don't want to play Derrick Henry at 9K on DraftKings full PPR as a dog against a good defense. And Derrick Henry is not in any of our top 20 optimals. I mean, I don't think Ham Builder is going to play Derrick Henry, and I don't think Opto Bros are going to get hardly any Derrick Henry either. It's a really tough click, though. Still, who in this game is more likely to score 3 touchdowns than Derrick Henry? It's probably him. Any thoughts on Ravens running back here tonight?
Yeah, I think this is maybe the most interesting spot of the whole slate. So for one, like we said, when Derrick Henry hits, we know exactly how it hits. And you could just get a whole lot of leverage off all the other Ravens skill players, and even to an extent, some of the Chiefs players, just by when he hits, he's running the clock. He's taking away opportunities from other Ravens players. The Ravens offense stays on the field. The Chiefs defense isn't getting opportunities to get sacks and turnovers. So from that perspective, he's a really, really good leverage spot. And like we were saying earlier, you kind of need to tell yourself a story of how your lineup's going to play, but you also need to be careful that you're not telling yourself the same story as everybody else. And I think this is one of those spots where everybody who wants to play some big dog is going to have the exact same story of, I'll probably pair him with the Ravens defense. Maybe I'll pair him with Patrick Mahomes and Rashee Rice. I'm not going to pair him with Pacheco because the Chiefs are going to be in catch-up mode. I think there's a really good opportunity to pair Henry with maybe Lamar on his own team. Maybe the Ravens offense just goes absolutely nuclear and they both get there. Maybe even pair Derrick Henry with the Chiefs defense, I think will be pretty unique. So from that perspective, I think, not only can you gain a lot of leverage on the rest of the field, but you can also gain a lot of leverage even on the other Derrick Henry lineups in a pretty unique way. And then I also think Justice Hill is really interesting. He's kind of priced around the defenses and the kickers who might feel a little safer. I know we'll get to them later. But the Ravens, we all kind of have this narrative that the Ravens brought in Derrick Henry for a reason. He's going to just ground and pound away. I think that's going to happen too. But looking back at the AFC Championship game, Justice Hill got a 3rd and 1 carry straight up the gut, which you would have thought would have gone to Gus Edwards. And then at the same time, Gus Edwards got a 3rd and 5 route run out of the backfield that you would have thought would have gone to Justice Hill. So, they've shown an ability to get a little wonky with their running back usage as recently as the last game they played against this very same team. So I think there's just a lot of leverage opportunities here to get weird.
It's interesting on the Justice Hill thing. Derrick Henry's not going to play if they're behind. I don't think. We haven't seen him with this coaching staff, but I'm pretty confident that if they get behind in this game, Derrick Henry is not going to play. And so Justice Hill as a pay up to be contrarian thing at only 11% in lineups, like maybe a Chiefs onslaught with Justice Hill, Cody, that would be like the first thing that would come to my mind. But I don't know if he has enough ceiling really to get there. But yeah, any Justice Hill thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, and to kind of back up Sam's point, he didn't play at all in the preseason, and Harbaugh's kind of specific with like the guys that he'll throw out there. He specifically mentioned that Justice Hill is going to be treated as a starter and is not going to play now. You could say that he's been there for a while. What does he need to run out there with Devin Leary in the 4th quarter of a preseason game? I think that was pretty telling. And then there was the offseason quote that he was going to play a lot of snaps, and I don't want to read too much into that stuff. I think Harbaugh clearly likes this guy, but I do agree that there is some chance that he steals some early down work, and a pretty good chance that he steals a lot of the pass down work as well. Very valuable on full PPR DraftKings, obviously. And I think in the opposite outcome of what we had just talked about in lineups where we want to play Derrick Henry, I think in lineups where we think the Chiefs just blow out Baltimore, Justice Hill ends up looking a lot better at 4,400.
All right, let's go to wide receiver. We already talked about the mispricings on Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy. This is, of course, relative to Marquise Brown being out, and also just the way it's run out in the preseason, right? Like Mahomes came in and played some preseason games. Worthy looked awesome. I know he caught that touchdown ball from Carson Wentz, but still, Worthy looked awesome. Rashee Rice has reportedly been tearing it up at camp. And you also get this combined, and I'll include tight end here as we talk about this. Also, you also get this combined with the narrative, which has been pushed by me, but the narrative that Travis Kelce will run a career low in routes this year, once again, after career low last year in routes per game, because they're saving him right now. They will have a long week after this game. It is the first game. If they were going to extend Travis Kelce and have him run his full complement of routes, I would not be surprised if it's this week. But anyways, my point is that we have Rashee Rice 2.8 points clear of Travis Kelce, which is maybe something that a lot of people don't expect here. So clearly, to me, Rice and Worthy are two of the most mispriced players on the slate. They'll also be among the most owned players on the entire slate. Let's talk about wide receiver and tight end together here, Cody, on the KC side.
And I think the most consistent pushback we're going to get today throughout the day, especially as people start building the lineups, looking at sim results in the solver and stuff, is there's no way Rashee Rice is going to be this owned at captain. And, I've already kind of pushed back on, okay, maybe we're a little bit high on Lamar. Maybe we can come down a little bit even more on Derrick Henry. Like, there's just some really good plays on this slate. And if you start to get Rashee Rice up to 17, 18, 19% captain ownership, you start to get even lower on some of these guys. And I just have a really tough time seeing guys like even Henry, Pacheco, Kelce, all these guys coming in the like mid to low single digits, just based off of what we've seen historically. Now, this $7,600 price tag might be such an anomaly, might be such a misprice for a guy who is, maybe one of the best receivers in the leagues, at least one of the best roles in the league in this Mahomes offense, specifically with Hollywood Brown out, that he is going to be that owned at captain. And that's one thing I'm a little bit worried about right now. I think if anything, that number at 13.1% is going to be higher rather than lower, but I would still push back a little bit. I don't think it's going to get crazy. Maybe it does, but I still think we're probably looking in kind of that 13 to 16% range. So maybe we'll go up a little bit more, but you don't need me to tell you that $7,600 Rashee Rice in this version of the KC offense is an awesome play. And you can almost say the same thing for Xavier Worthy. Now, the one thing, and I sent out the joke on Twitter that, had my drafts ready for tonight. This is either going to be Tyreek Hill at 5,800, or we can laugh at the field for playing 35% of a 165-pound gadget guy. It's mostly a joke, but I think there's a pretty wide range of outcomes here. Now, we feel pretty confident about his role just based off what we saw in the preseason, the fact that they traded up into the first round, 28th overall to take him. Hollywood Brown is out. They need this guy to really stretch the field and really be a receiver for him. And by all accounts, he's going to do exactly that. But I think this is a skill set here where there is going to be a pretty wide range of outcomes, and that you don't have that type of wide range of outcomes for somebody like Rashee Rice, who is operating a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage, has more volume security, and things like that. So if I'm looking at these two plays of the two misprices on the Chiefs wide receiver core, that there's one that I'm a little bit more concerned about. It's probably Worthy rather than Rice, but look, yeah, they're both phenomenal plays.
Well, we also have them, 18% apart in ownership, right? Like, even though Rashee Rice is significantly more expensive, I agree. I think that they are going to go full blast on Xavier Worthy. But remember, last year, Rashee Rice was playing awesome, making a huge impact for them every time he was on the field, and they still didn't extend his routes. We know that they but they are willing to put Justin Watson out there a ton. Our expectation is Justin Watson will mostly play the role that Marquise Brown would have played, but of course not earning targets at the same rate. I think a question a lot of people have, Sam, is like, how can I play Rashee Rice smartly, right? Like, I want to play Rashee Rice a captain, or I want to play Rashee Rice on my teams. How can I play Rashee Rice smartly? I would guess, my first instinct is that just don't play him with Worthy, right? And that immediately makes you more unique. But any thoughts on playing Rashee Rice? Anything else on Chiefs pass catchers?
Yeah, like you said, I think trying to limit the number of lineups that you play both Rice and Worthy together is going to be important. I think, like we talked about, there's just this group of guys in the mid-tier who should be all priced higher than they are based on our expected usage, Rice and Worthy being at least two of them. And so you could definitely limit your exposure to both of them in the same lineup. I also think it's important in Showdown to kind of recognize that captain and flex are two different positions. And I agree with Cody's points on where Rice is going to come in at captain. I think in smaller fields where everybody is hand building with projections, those captain numbers are going to come in even higher. I wouldn't be shocked if in some of those small fields, Rice got all the way up to 19, 20% at captain. And because of that, I think he really is a very interesting spot to get overweight at flex. And, you know, he gets a lot of these short ADOT targets. They set up a lot of screens for him. He's going to get his looks, and he's really good run after the catch. So if he just has, you know, a game slightly below our projection, let's say he gets 15 points or something, maybe goes 6 receptions for 90, he's not going to bury you. And he's definitely not going to be the optimal captain at that output of 15 points. But you probably still want him in your lineup if he gets 15 points. And so I think that makes a spot where you can have a lot of really smart lineups and you have the value that Rice provides without having your lineup need him to be the optimal captain.
Any thoughts on the dust balls here, Cody? I mean, if you think Travis Kelce's routes are going to be reduced significantly, I think Noah Gray is interesting. Jared Wiley, the rookie, has gotten a bit of hype. I don't know how much he's going to play, if at all. And then you have our old friends like Mecole Hardman and Sky Moore, etc. Any thoughts on the dust balls tonight, Cody?
Yeah, these guys are always interesting, and this is part of the fun, if you want to call it that, of Chiefs slates, is you always have, you know, what, 5 or 6 pass catchers certainly in play. Maybe you can go as deep as 7 or 8 on this particular slate with some of these guys at the very end. But as we'll look at our sim results here in a second, and some of these guys are going to be finding their way in, A, because it helps you reduce dupes, B, because they're cheap enough to kind of make everything else work, and C, because the projection there is actually okay. You know, you get 7.4 points, which is the ceiling for Mecole Hardman. That might be okay to actually look decent in some lineups. You probably want closer to double digits from him at that point. But I think these guys, Justin Watson down to Juju, make some sense as guys you want to include. If you want to get really deep and really bank on that Travis Kelce, you get it getting pulled back more. I think the guy to go to there is Noah Gray.
Yeah.
They did draft Jared Wiley. You know, you can get funky with some of these $200 guys, but you need to be really careful about how much of them you're playing. But look, that sub 10% ownership or right at 10% ownership on all these guys, I think they should certainly be a part of our 150 pool.
Yeah, I'll just say again, if they're going to extend Travis Kelce at any point this season, this is a good game to do it, right? Like, he's obviously fresh coming in. Season hasn't started yet, and they have a long week here coming up. And of course, you know, big game against the Ravens could decide home field advantage in the AFC playoffs, etc. So a good spot to really extend Kelce. I think he's just expensive, but that's going to keep ownership down. We do have pretty significant Kelce projected ownership here, up at 28%. Let's go to the Ravens side of things, where the most mispriced player, I think, is pretty clearly Mark Andrews. We have him with the most points, and he's 1,600 less than Zay Flowers. Now, that said, I do like Zay Flowers here, and there's a ton of Bateman hype out there. I know people are sick of hearing about Bateman hype. Cody, what do you think about overall Ravens pass catchers here tonight?
Yeah, my first take, just seeing these guys on the screen right next to one each other, Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers, is that ownership gap probably gets even wider. 43.5% for Andrews, 35.4% for Flowers in total, and 7.5% and 6.4% of captain. As Sam pointed out, with hand builders that are using projections, I think that will get even wider. The $1,600 price gap lets you do a lot of things, helps you get one or both of the quarterbacks, helps you get up to Rashee Rice, helps you get to Pacheco, helps you avoid some of these really cheap dust balls that we have to play. So I think Zay Flowers, if not for Derrick Henry, would probably be the likeliest to squeeze candidate on this slate. I like both of them just as bringbacks and Chiefs heavy stuff. I like Zay Flowers as a potential really low owned captain. You know, Gary talked about this a lot on our shows last year. If you want to get overweight on somebody at captain without going aggressive on their total ownership, I think we see like Zay Flowers at 4 to 5% captain ownership. You can have 8 to 10%, have a little bit of leverage against the field, and not go crazy with your total exposure to him. And I think he's a guy that does have that type of slate winning upside. We've gotten a few questions on Rashad Bateman. Asked the projection team on that, and it seems like we're pretty confident in our inputs on him. We are expecting him to play more than he did last year. It's kind of what Leone said, but not expecting the targets per route run to really be all that much improved, with Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews having such a lion's share of the opportunities here in Baltimore. So I wrote it in the article. Bateman does feel like, given where he's priced, that so bad that it might actually be kind of good play. If you're really looking for a way to get unique, $5,200 Rashad Bateman is probably one of the worst priced skill position players on the slate. We have 19.2% right now. If he flipped at like 13%, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. So I think if you want a way to get different in some of those Chiefs heavy onslaughts and want a really low owned bring back, I think Bateman could certainly be that for you. And then my mind is in a pretzel on these other two guys, Nelson Aguilar, Isaiah Likely. The offseason drumbeat for Likely has been really positive, really strong. In order for him to play, we would expect quite a bit of two tight end sets with one of him or Andrews popping out to the slot while the other one plays in line. And if that's the case, that would really hurt Aguilar, who kind of really needs those slot opportunities to pop. So if you're thinking about rules or groupings of players, I think not playing Likely and Aguilar together is pretty sharp. I think they just kind of cannibalize one another's upside. But I'm kind of just struggling with which one I like most here. Off-season stuff would say that Likely's the guy to like, but I think the field kind of would agree with that.
Right. Yeah, I'll say a few things. First, on Bateman, yes, he looks really mispriced compared to our projection. A lot of people are higher on Bateman than us. And so I think Bateman's ownership could stay up despite this price. We're lower than market on Bateman because, man, I mean, his underlying data, when I know he's been hurt and I know he's been in different roles, but his underlying data when he's been on the field has just been bad. I mean, just like flat bad. And so I don't know for sure that he can't play, but he certainly has not shown it yet. Ravens shown a lot of confidence in him this offseason. They let Odell Beckham walk, did not really replace him. Do not think Devontae Walker is going to play very much, if at all, in this game. Same with Tylan Wallace. So I get it on Bateman. I kind of want to see it from him first. Aguilar one is interesting to me. I mean, he could get under 10% total ownership here because I think people are going to prefer Likely and do prefer Bateman. Aguilar, of course, famously had a bunch of drops in Philly that were ugly, but they gave him chances and he made plays for them last year. Last thing I'd say, Sam, on the Likely stuff, they have really struggled to get Likely and Andrews on the field successfully together. This offseason, they claimed that they would. You see a lot of these claims every offseason. We're going to play this guy and this guy together. These are our best players. More often than not, it does not actually come out to fruition. I always considered Likely more of a handcuff to Andrews than standalone value. Now, I could be wrong here. They could have been cooking up stuff all summer for Isaiah Likely, but my take right now is we're going to see Isaiah Likely maybe not play as much as people want. That said, Sam, he's only 2,600. And I guess you could make a case he provides some direct leverage off of Mark Andrews, who's going to be one of the most owned players on the slate. So, Sam, any thoughts on Likely versus Andrews stuff and anything else on Ravens pass catchers?
Yeah, I think there's, once again, a lot of different leverage opportunities here. I think Likely and Bateman, you can kind of group together as far as guys who, there's been lots of off-season narratives around, and they both are kind of classic steam candidates from that perspective of people want to fall into the narratives. I think Bateman is priced high enough that even if people are excited to play him and kind of want to take that shot to be early on him and follow the narratives, 5,200 is just a really uncomfortable click given all the other value on the slate. So I'm happy to take shots there, given that I think the ownership will stay in check. I don't know how much exposure I'll have to Likely. I think he definitely provides good leverage off Andrews, and I think he also provides good leverage off other Andrews lineups. If you play them both together, it wouldn't be a shock to see the two of them combined for 3 touchdowns. And then, not many lineups are going to be playing them together. And I think, like Cody said, Zay Flowers is an awesome spot too. He's a true slate breaker. In that AFC Championship game, he nearly had a second touchdown that I believe he was like diving into the end zone and the ball was punched from his hands. He also had another big catch with that famous taunting call that went against him. So we already saw that he can absolutely break the slate against the Chiefs, and there's no reason he can't do it tonight. I do think in small field, his captain ownership will come in above Andrews because kind of in those small fields, the true slate breakers usually get steamed up. But I do think his flex ownership will stay in check. I think most people who prioritize getting some Zay leverage will do so at captain. And so similar to Rashee Rice, I think he, from a leverage standpoint, makes a very interesting flex play.
Yeah, that's super interesting for sure. One thing that we talk about, Cody, before we move to defense and kicker is like, can you outscore the defenses and the kickers? And Likely is priced at a point where he's like way cheaper than the defenses and kickers. And I feel like he can hit a ceiling. So like maybe lineups that don't include kicker or defense include Likely and hope that they beat them are interesting to me, which brings me to kicker and defense. Cody, we of course get asked all the time, how many should I use? How often should I be using them? Is this the right game to be using kicker and defense? It's a complicated thing because normally in DFS, of course, we're not worried about kicker very much. Cody, any thoughts here on kicker and defense tonight? How would you be playing this?
Yeah, I mean, looking at it both from a historical perspective of how often do these groups find top 1% finishing lineups, and if you look at our sim results, they typically say that defenses and kickers are plus EV plays individually and are generally more likely to be optimal, particularly at flex, than their ownership would indicate. And I just looked at this before the show because I wanted to throw some a wet blanket on everyone who's excited for the offensive production tonight. 40.9% of top 1% finishing lineups featured at least one kicker. This dates back to 2020. 32.3% feature at least one DST, and 59.0% feature at least one kicker or DST. So over half the time, a top 1% finishing lineup is going to have at least one kicker or defense in them. And I don't think that's any different. I think one of our top lineups tonight has Harrison Butker in there. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't be a shock to see Justin Tucker make his way in there as well. And then moving on from those guys, I think the Chiefs D at 3,600, looking at Brandon Thorne's O-line and D-line rankings, I think it's you can make a pretty good case to get excited about the Chiefs defense. Very good pass rush against a slightly below average offensive line, especially if we're expecting more dropbacks. No one's better at avoiding pressure than Lamar, and no one can scramble away from pressure better than Lamar, but I still think that there are opportunities for sacks and turnovers there. So I do think this is going to come with a little bit of ownership, but I do think the Chiefs D is pretty interesting. And then certainly in cash game contests, looking Harrison Butker's direction as maybe the one non-skill position player guy that you have to get onto. $400 cheaper than Justin Tucker, gets to kick it home, higher team total. I think makes a lot of sense at 4,600.
Yeah, Harrison Butker is in 35% of our top 20 optimals. I do think that in these games where the total is 47.5, everyone expects it to be really offensive, Sam, that people underplay kicker and defense. I know Cody's talked a bunch about that. Any more thoughts on kicker and defense here tonight?
Yeah, I think all four of these special team options are really good plays tonight. I think, like we talked about, despite the mid-tier kind of getting underpriced on this slate, the low tier is almost overpriced, even though they are still very cheap. And I guess what I mean by that is there's a bunch of guys in the 1K, 2K range that we can't feel good about at all. Maybe one of them catches a touchdown, maybe one of them catches a long ball, but it kind of gets you to this point where you're hoping for like a 7-8 point ceiling. Even a 2-yard touchdown catch from Noah Gray gets you 7.2 points. There's a good chance that one of these kickers outscores them or one of the defenses outscore them. We've seen this from DraftKings regularly. When there's a defense facing a good offense, then the defense is going to be priced down. And so we have both of these defenses priced down this week, and they're just better projectable points for those defenses than there are for any of the options underneath them. And so I definitely expect to be playing a whole lot of the defenses tonight.
All right. Normally we get to the flag plants at this portion of the program, but special treat today, we're going to show some sim stuff. If we can tech lord this, we will try to. I will stop sharing my screen now, Cody. Perhaps you want to try to share your screen if we can actually execute this. Oh, we executed. All right, so what Cody is showing now is the solver optimizer, which can then go into the sim stuff, correct? So yeah, for those of you guys who don't know, basically what this is showing is if you have an ETR in-season sub and you add on the solver simulator, you're going to get to this stuff here that we're about to start talking about. Cody has both the optimizer and the simulator in his account. So it looks like Cody has optimized some lineups.
Yeah.
And now he's going to simulate some.
I'll talk through the navigation here. I've already simulated these lineups, but all this is very simple. I don't have any rules set. I don't have any adjustments to projections or anything like that. I've added a little bit of variance to these lineups just so I can get a little bit of difference here. I've optimized 300 lineups. The solver can simulate up to 500 lineups, and then went down here to press simulate. You can see all the different field sizes of the potential simulations you can do. I believe we have quarter arcade all the way up to the 333 Wildcat for the Showdown sims. And then once those Showdowns simulate, it'll kick you over here to your sim results. It's got all 300 of my lineup simmed. You can view it by player, certainly view it by lineup, of course. And you can click on here on this graphic icon over here, and it'll kind of show you a little bit more details about your sim results. How often are you caching? What is your expected ROI? And at that point now, I kind of want to kick it back over to Sam. Sam obviously has had his hands in this stuff, is the one best served out of all of us to kind of explain what's happening here. And we can talk through some of the lineups in particular, but maybe some of the results just more from a macro perspective. And then we can kind of look both high level, where are our best sim ROIs directionally, and maybe look at some lineups on the other end of the spectrum to get an idea of why some lineups are simming poorly. So Sam, do you want to take it away on some of these lineups up here at the top?
Let me just ask Sam real quick, maybe just explain for the people exactly what's happening here when you simulate, right? Like when we say we're simming, what exactly does that mean? And then how you would use this page here after you got a bunch of the lineups.
Yeah, so from a very high level, there's a couple key components to the sim. One of them is our projections. So obviously, when you go to the projection page on the ETR site, you see that, Patrick Mahomes is projected for 20 points or whatever we have him projected for exactly. But in reality, he's never going to score exactly 20 points. Maybe he will, but there's kind of a distribution of outcomes that he could score in any given game. So what we have done behind the scenes is we've simulated an actual game 20,000 times over. And we say in each of these 20,000 simulations, how many points does each player score? And those are correlated with their teammates. So we're not going to have situations where Patrick Mahomes scores 40 points, but none of his pass catchers get any. These are all correlated outcomes here. And then we also, behind the scenes, have a bunch of lineups that we expect the field to be entering into these contests. So we are essentially taking the points scored by your test lineup that you're inputting, comparing it to the outcomes in that simulation of all the field lineups that we have behind the scenes, and then applying the payout structure for the contest that you're choosing. And you average that across all the simulations, and you get your summary ROI.
When you get to this page here, a lot of people are going to say, including myself, like, oh, the top lineup's the best lineup, right? Like, oh, that has to be it. I'm going to play that one. Is that the way that people should be using this sim? I presume not.
Yeah, so I definitely think you need to take into account the ROI of each lineup relative to all the other ROIs that you're simming. So, the top lineup there is showing a incredible ROI of over 1,000%. A few of them are over 1,000%. And in reality, you're probably not going to realize that ROI on each of those lineups, but they should be higher than all of the lineups below it. And that's because, again, we're kind of guessing at what the field is going to be playing in these contests, but that does not account for any sort of leveling of all the other people who will also be using these sims. So if, for example, on an extreme case, if every single person entering the Millie Maker tonight were to use these sims and enter the exact same top lineups, then in fact that sim ROI would be highly negative. So we still need to use our judgment of what we think the field is going to be doing to some degree, and making sure that we think the lineups we're entering will be unique enough to get to the top.
Yeah, and you can see there's a ceiling column too, which I like to look at. You see there's a lineup in there with a ceiling of 251. which was one of the higher ones. And there's that one at the top, the sim ROI is 122%, very strong, but not as strong as some of the other ones. But the ceiling was the highest there pretty significantly at 271, that Rashee Rice captain one with Bateman, Tucker, and Lamar in there. Also, any thoughts on evaluating lineups based on ceiling, Sam versus cash rate, or anything like that?
Yeah, I definitely think the ceiling is helpful to use. I will note that I wouldn't overweight it. The ROI is kind of the score that kind of takes everything into account together. And it's great if that lineup can hit the ceiling in, let's say, a couple percent of sims. But if it doesn't hit that ceiling very often, then it's might not be as good of an ROI on average. And I think that's what we really want in the long term.
Okay. I want to be clear that this is based on our projections and our ownership projections. If you were to adjust those, it would change a lot. If you think we're wrong about X person's ownership projection or Y person's actual projection, that is going to change a ton here. Also, I want to be clear that the sims are for specific contests. We're looking at the one here, it is for the big one on DraftKings, the $15 buy-in. That is so top heavy. Part of that goes into the ROI, right? What kind of lineups can actually get into first place because it's so top heavy. And that's the kind of stuff that you see with Samurai. If you were looking at a flatter contest, I don't know, something like the 333 or whatever, which has a flatter payout, there would be different kinds of lineups that would be better for that contest. So please be sure if you're using the sim, you are using it for the right contest. How much does the sim cost? The single lineup sim, I think, is a great way for people to get started. Would you agree, Sam? It's $20 a month for the single lineup sim. Of course, you do need an ETR in-season sub to have access to our projections and ownership in there as well. But yeah, this is the 150 sim, which I believe is $40 a month, if I'm not mistaken. You need to double check that on Solver. But just to make one sim lineup, say you want to make a team, test it, see how it is. Oh, I don't like that, I want to change something, go test that again. That's the $20 one. So yeah, definitely check that out. Oh, and by the way, if you're interested in using the Solver for optimizer and or simulator, promo code ETR5, if it's your first purchase, 5% off at the Solver. Again, please be sure to use the link that's on top there of ETR. All right. Anything else on sims before we move on here?
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point there, Adam, that these results are all, of course, based on our input. So if in the contest you're playing that Rashee Rice is going to come in higher at captain, for example, you play that contest every night and you have a really good feel for it, and you think he's going to come in higher than the 13% that we have on average, then those Rashee Rice captain lineups are going to have a way worse ROI in reality. These are average ROIs, and it's definitely important to understand the context of the contest that you're playing specifically.
100%. All right. Cody, see if you can your tech lord your way out of this. I'll bring back up our projections here so we can get to the flag plants. Nobody has watched this whole show. Nobody has listened the entire time. They just fast forward to the end because, of course, they want the flag plants again. This is just for fun. We're trying not to flag plant things like this Stone Cold Chalk, right? I think Rashee Rice is one of the best plays on the slate. I'm not going to flag plant a guy projected to be owned at 53% or Lamar or Mahomes at 76%. You can. We don't have any hard and fast rules here. But again, flag plant, all in good fun. Cody, it's only fitting. King Showdown Virgin, you get the first flag plant of the 2024 season. The floor is yours.
I appreciate you doing that because I think Sam and I are kind of on the same wavelength here a little bit. There's a couple of good options. Obviously, ownership's going to condense on some of these top plays, and they're top plays for a reason. I think there's one guy that throughout the course of the show has stood out to me as a guy that will likely come down in terms of his total ownership. It might come down in the contest that I'm playing in terms of his captain ownership. I want to be overweight both of those spots on Baltimore's clear-cut alpha wide receiver one, Zay Flowers at 8K. I think you're on mute, Adam.
Zay Flowers for Cody, the classic high upside wide receiver on the underdog team. Certainly like Zay Flowers here tonight. Sam. your first career flag plant.
Yeah, this is a big spot to be making a first career flag plant. There was one that I had in mind, and I think it's a really good one. I won't take it though. I think there's one clear best leverage spot on the slate right now. If our projections were to hold, and I think that's the Chiefs defense. It's pretty boring, but I think you can play them at really low ownership, and I think you can play them in a variety of different lineup narratives with several different leverage spots. They can hit in multiple different ways. One, like we said earlier, it's pretty easy that they could outscore everybody priced below them. It wouldn't be crazy for that to happen. If they get a good score because the Ravens don't score much on offense, then you can get a lot of leverage off of all the Ravens skill pieces by playing them with Chiefs onslaught. And I think you can also play them in lineups where you've got Lamar and some of the pass catchers, maybe even pair him with Cody's flag plant and Zay, where Lamar throws a pick 6, maybe 2, and they shoot up the leaderboard there, and then you get leverage off of all the Chiefs skill players who lost the offensive drive there. So at this low ownership, I'm gonna go with the Chiefs here.
All right, I love it. Chiefs defense from Sam as we think outside the box. I, a more mid IQ thinker, am going to stay in the box. And listen, I have stone cold zero of this guy in best ball. I did I don't know. I think I did close to 200 drafts. 0 times did I take this guy. So I don't feel great about it. However, in Showdown, you need to get nuts. The 2 easiest plays to click on the slate, in my opinion, are Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice. But what if it's the guy who's been having the sex all summer? He's been having the sex with Taylor. He's in Germany having the sex. He's in Europe. He's everywhere having the sex with Taylor Swift. And now he comes back for his first game of the season, wants to prove that he has not been distracted by all the sex. And also, as I mentioned, long week for them after this game and a big game for them. Again, this could end out deciding who gets home field advantage in the AFC playoffs between the Chiefs and the Ravens. So if you're going to extend Travis Kelce, you do it tonight. And I think in some of these hand builder contests, Kelce's going to come in real low. I mean, 9,600. He is so much more expensive than Rashee and Xavier. So Travis Kelce, 2 double dong tonight, 2 touchdowns for Travis Kelce. All right. That is going to do it for the first Showdown breakdown of the year. We'll be back with shows typically on Fridays and Mondays, time to time on Sundays also, but mostly Fridays and Mondays. Mondays will typically be premium. I'm sorry, Thursdays and Mondays. Monday will typically be premium. Thursdays will sometimes be free on here. If you want access to all our projections and all the sims and everything, head to establishtheRun.com. All the information that you need on all this stuff is in these tabs up here. Content schedule for NFL, solver stuff, optimizer, and sims is up there. You can read more about it there. And it's important because we're going to be changing and tweaking stuff throughout the day on both ownership and projections. And a lot of this stuff is going to change because of that. Our week 1 main slate projections are indeed up already here for DraftKings. My God. All right. Appreciate everyone being here. This was fun. For Cody, for Sam, crushing it in his YouTube debut, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.